It was a calm evening, and the house felt unusually silent. I had taken my regular dose of sleeping medication, the kind that helps me unwind after exhausting days. The lights were turned low, and I gradually headed to the bedroom, sensing the drugs beginning to take effect. I had no idea what the night would bring, but I could never have predicted the events about to unfold. As I lay beneath the soft blankets, my mind slowly released the day's stresses, and I slipped into a deep, tranquil sleep. Little did I know, something unusual was occurring in the house. Earlier that evening, my stepson and his two friends had arrived. They were older teens, a few years apart in age, but they often hung out together here, laughing, joking, and sometimes making more noise than I preferred. I never gave it much thought. They were just kids having fun. I trusted them, especially my stepson, who had always been respectful, even as he grew more independent. What I didn't realize was that this night was different for them. As I drifted deeper into sleep, soothed by the strong effects of the pills, the three of them were downstairs speaking in hushed tones. Something was happening. Something I could never have imagined. They had been drinking, and their conversation had taken a risky turn. My stepson, emboldened by the alcohol, proposed something reckless, and his friends, caught up in the excitement, eagerly agreed. The clock struck midnight, and the house fell silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. I was completely unaware of what was happening just outside my bedroom door. The boys had devised a plan, one that would alter everything. I shifted slightly in my sleep, vaguely sensing someone nearby. My body felt heavy, weighed down by the medication, and I barely registered the faint creak of a door opening. In my dreamlike state, it felt distant, as if part of another reality. They entered the room quietly, their movements cautious at first. My stepson led the way, his two friends trailing behind, exchanging nervous glances. They had never done anything like this before, but there was a strange energy pushing them forward, even as part of them hesitated. The room was dark, but the faint glow from the streetlights outside cast a soft light through the blinds. I lay on my back, completely oblivious to their presence, breathing slowly and steadily in deep sleep. My stepson moved closer, his heart pounding. He had thought about this for a long time, but now that the moment had arrived, it felt surreal. His friends watched, waiting for him to make the first move. They whispered among themselves, nervous yet excited. The alcohol had pushed them past the point of no return, but they were still aware of their actions. This was something irreversible, and they all knew it. Slowly, my stepson reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he touched my arm. It was a gentle touch, so light that I didn't wake up. The sleeping pills had done their job, and I remained in a deep, dreamless slumber. But in that moment, everything changed. His friends moved closer, their eyes wide as they watched him. It felt like a scene from a movie, something unreal, yet it was happening. The excitement and tension in the air were palpable. They were caught up in the thrill of doing something forbidden, something they knew they shouldn't be doing. My stepson leaned over me, his breath shallow as he whispered something to his friends. They nodded, their hearts racing as they positioned themselves on either side of the bed. One of them glanced at my face, wondering if I would wake up, but I didn't stir. I was too far gone, too deep in sleep to notice anything. What followed was a blur of emotions, a whirlwind of sensations none of us could have predicted. My body, unresponsive in the moment, became the focus of their attention. The boys, driven by their desires and the intoxication of the moment, let themselves get lost in it. Time seemed to slow as they carried out their plan, each of them caught up in the fantasy they had built in their minds. It was something they had joked about before, something they never thought would actually happen. But now here they were, doing the unthinkable. As the minutes passed, they grew bolder, more daring. The lines between right and wrong blurred, and they stopped caring about the consequences. They were in too deep now, and there was no turning back. Their hands, once hesitant, moved with confidence, driven by the thrill of the moment. My stepson, leading the way, glanced at his friends with a mischievous grin. They were in this together, and nothing could stop them now. They were riding a wave of excitement, a high unlike anything they had ever experienced. But then, something shifted. One of the boys, the quieter one, began to feel a pang of guilt. He looked at me, lying there so peacefully, and something inside him changed. He hadn't expected to feel this way, but now that they were in the middle of it, he wasn't sure he could go through with it. He nudged my stepson, whispering that maybe they should stop, that maybe this wasn't such a good idea after all. But my stepson was too caught up in the heat of the moment to listen. He brushed off his friend's concern, determined to see it through. The other boy, torn between his own desires and his friend's growing unease, didn't know what to do. He wanted to keep going, but he could sense the tension rising in the room. It was like a ticking time bomb, and he wasn't sure how long they had before something went wrong. Just as they were about to take things further, I stirred. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but it was enough to send a jolt of panic through the room. My stepson froze, his heart racing as he watched me. I hadn't woken up, but the slight shift in my body was enough to make them all pause. The room fell silent, the tension thick in the air. They held their breath, waiting to see if I would wake up, but the sleeping pills still had their grip on me, and I remained in deep sleep, unaware of what was happening around me. Relieved but shaken, they pulled back, their excitement now tinged with fear. What had started as a wild idea, a thrilling adventure, was now spiraling out of control. My stepson looked at his friends, his expression unreadable. They had crossed a line and they all knew it. One of the boys, the one who had spoken up earlier, finally voiced what they were all thinking. "We should stop. This isn't right." His voice was quiet, but the words hung heavily in the air. My stepson hesitated, his mind racing. He knew his friend was right, but part of him didn't want to stop. The thrill, the adrenaline, it was intoxicating. But deep down, he knew they had gone too far. He glanced at me again, still asleep, and something inside him shifted. Slowly, reluctantly, he nodded. They had to stop. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. The excitement was gone, replaced by a creeping sense of guilt and regret. They had pushed things too far and there was no taking it back. Without a word, they quietly slipped out of the room, their footsteps barely audible as they retreated to the living room. The house was still again, and I remained blissfully unaware of what had just happened. As they sat in the living room, the weight of their actions settled over them. None of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken thoughts. My stepson stared at the floor, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. What had they been thinking? How had it come to this? His friends sat beside him, equally lost in their own thoughts. The fun, the thrill of the moment, was long gone. All that remained was a lingering sense of unease. They knew they had crossed a line, and now they had to live with it. Morning came, and I woke up feeling groggy, the effects of the sleeping pills still lingering. I had no idea what had happened during the night, no clue that anything had occurred at all. To me, it was just another peaceful night's sleep. But for my stepson and his friends, everything had changed. The weight of their actions hung over them. A constant reminder of the night they had almost gone too far. They tried to act normal, to pretend like nothing had happened, but the tension between them was impossible to ignore. As the days passed, the memory of that night lingered in their minds, a secret they couldn't escape. The days that followed were marked by a strange, heavy silence between my stepson and his two friends. They came over less frequently, their usual laughter and rowdy behaviour replaced by awkward glances and stilted conversations. I noticed the change but didn't question it. In my mind, it was just a phase. They were teenagers after all, and sometimes they acted strangely for reasons I would never fully understand. What I didn't realise was the internal struggle each of them was dealing with. My stepson, in particular, found it hard to face me after that night. Guilt gnawed at him every time he saw me, and his friends were no different. They had shared an unspoken bond before, one of fun and mischief, but now it was tarnished by something darker. The tension between them was palpable. One afternoon, I decided to do some cleaning around the house. As I dusted the shelves and rearranged things, I stumbled across an old picture of my stepson and his friends. They were younger, more carefree. It struck me then how much things had changed. I didn't realize at the time what that shift meant, but I could feel that something wasn't quite right. My stepson was distant, more than usual, and his friends didn't visit as often. When they did, they seemed nervous, as if they were walking on eggshells around me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened, something they weren't telling me. But I brushed it off, thinking maybe they were just growing up, starting to find their own way. I trusted my stepson, even if he was acting strangely, but deep down I began to wonder if I had missed something important. Weeks passed, and I started noticing small changes in my stepson's behavior. He was spending more time alone, avoiding eye contact when we spoke. His friends, too, seemed different. One of them, the quieter one, appeared especially troubled. He could barely look at me without a guilty expression crossing his face. It was almost as if he wanted to say something but held back, afraid of what might happen if he did. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, I found myself lying awake, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't quite piece together. I felt a strange sense of unease, as if something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. I replayed the past few weeks in my mind, trying to figure out when things had started to feel so off. Then it hit me, the night I had taken the sleeping pills. It had been a routine night, or so I thought, but something about the way my stepson and his friends had acted since then made me wonder, could something have happened while I was asleep? The thought seemed absurd at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it nagged at me. I couldn't shake the sense that I was overlooking something crucial. My gut told me that whatever had shifted between my stepson and his friends had begun that night. But how could I be certain? They were behaving so oddly, yet none of them had said a word to me. The next day, I made up my mind to confront my stepson. It wasn't easy. I didn't know how to bring it up without sounding paranoid. But I couldn't ignore the persistent feeling that something significant had happened that night, something I needed to understand. "Is everything okay?" I asked him one evening when we were alone in the kitchen. He looked up from his phone, startled, as if he hadn't expected the question. "Yeah, why?" he replied too quickly. "You've been acting different lately," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "You and your friends. Is something going on?" For a moment, he didn't respond. He just stared at me, his eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. Then, just as quickly, he looked away, avoiding my gaze. "No, everything's fine," he muttered, but I could hear the tremor in his voice. I didn't push it, not yet, but I knew there was more to the story than he was letting on. I decided to let it go for the time being, hoping that eventually he would feel comfortable enough to tell me the truth. As the days passed, I kept a close watch on him and his friends, waiting for any clues that might explain what had happened. My stepson continued to act distant, and his friends avoided the house more and more. Something was clearly weighing on them, and I was determined to figure out what it was. Then, one evening, everything changed. It was late, and I was sitting in the living room flipping through a magazine when I heard a knock at the door. It was one of my stepson's friends, the quiet one, the one who always seemed the most uneasy around me. He looked pale, his hands shaking as he stood on the doorstep. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. He sat down on the couch, his head in his hands, as if he was wrestling with something inside. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice trembling. "About that night, when you took the sleeping pills." My heart raced as I sat down across from him. I had known something was wrong, but hearing him say it out loud made it all too real. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely steady. He took a deep breath, his hands shaking as he began to speak. We did something we shouldn't have." He went on to describe what had happened that night, how they had come into my room while I was sleeping, how my stepson had led the way, and how they had gotten caught up in something they couldn't control. His voice was filled with regret, and I could see the guilt etched on his face. I didn't want to go along with it, he said, tears welling up in his eyes, but I didn't know how to stop it. As he spoke, a mix of emotions flooded through me: shock, anger, disbelief. I could barely comprehend what he was telling me. My stepson, the boy I had trusted and cared for, had betrayed me in the most unimaginable way. When he finished speaking, there was a long silence. I didn't know what to say or what to feel. The room seemed to close in around me, the weight of his confession pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to make it right." I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process everything. My mind was racing, and I felt a knot of anger tightening in my chest. But I also felt a strange sense of relief. Relief that I finally knew the truth, that I wasn't imagining things. After what felt like an eternity, I stood up. "Thank you for telling me," I said quietly. He nodded, wiping the tears from his eyes before standing and leaving the house. I watched him go, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to figure out what to do next. The truth was out, but it had left me shattered. I couldn't look at my stepson the same way anymore. Everything had changed, and I didn't know how to move forward from here. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. The weight of what had happened pressed down on me, suffocating me. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, confusion. I had trusted my stepson, and he had taken advantage of that trust in the worst possible way. The next morning, I confronted him. I told him what his friend had confessed, and at first he denied it. But eventually the guilt was too much for him to bear, and he broke down, admitting everything. "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I don't know why we did it." I didn't have the words to respond. I didn't know if I could ever forgive him. The trust between us had been broken, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. In the end, I decided to send him away, to give myself the space I needed to heal. It was one of the hardest decisions I had ever made, but I knew it was the right one. As time passed, I tried to move on from what had happened, but the memory of that night lingered. It was a scar that would never fully heal, a reminder of the betrayal I had endured. But I also learned something important: that sometimes the people you trust the most can hurt you in ways you never imagined. And while the pain may never fully go away, you can find the strength to move forward, to rebuild your life piece by piece. It wasn't easy, but over time I found my way back to myself. And in the end, that was all I could do. If you're interested in such stories, stay with us till the end. There are more tales like this that will thrill you. For this, please like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you. Bringing someone new into my life was always an exciting idea, but nothing could have prepared me for the surprise I encountered when I invited a 55-year-old man into my home. It all started on a rainy evening when I stumbled upon him at a local cafe, a place I often visited to escape my routine. He sat alone at a table, his grey hair contrasting sharply with his deep blue eyes, which seemed to tell stories of a life well lived. There was an undeniable allure about him. His rugged hands and the way he carried himself exuded a quiet confidence. After exchanging glances and smiles, I mustered the courage to approach him. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, as if we had known each other for years. He was charming, with a dry sense of humour that had me laughing long after our initial meeting. I learned he was a retired architect, spending his days exploring art galleries and reading novels, living a life that seemed rich in experience. There was something undeniably magnetic about him, and as the rain drummed on the cafe's windows, I found myself enchanted. As the evening wore on, I invited him back to my place, hoping to extend our captivating conversation. He accepted with a smile, and my heart raced with a mix of excitement and nervousness. When we arrived at my apartment, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. We shared a bottle of wine, the rich flavors and warmth breaking down any remaining barriers between us. The conversation became more intimate, the laughter more genuine, and I could feel a connection sparking between us. After a while, he excused himself to use the bathroom. I remained in the living room trying to calm my racing thoughts. I couldn't help but wonder what this night might lead to. A few moments later, I heard the bathroom door open and I turned to see him stepping out, a casual confidence in his stride. What surprised me, though, was the way he looked at me. His gaze was intense, filled with a desire that sent shivers down my spine. "Can I tell you a secret?" he said, his voice low and inviting. I nodded, curiosity piqued. He took a step closer and the air between us crackled with anticipation. "I've always found younger women captivating," he admitted, a smirk playing on his lips. The confession hung between us like a thick fog, leaving my heart pounding. "You don't know what you're getting into," I teased, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fluttering in my chest. He chuckled, stepping closer still until we were almost touching. The intensity of his gaze held me captive, and I felt an exhilarating rush. The world outside faded away, leaving just the two of us in that charged moment. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering against my skin. "Maybe I like the thrill of it," he murmured, his breath warm against my cheek. The unexpected tenderness in his voice sent a wave of heat through me, and before I could think, I found myself leaning in closer. The space between us evaporated as he tilted my chin up, his lips just a breath away from mine. The moment stretched into eternity, my heart racing as I waited for him to close the distance. When he finally did, it was like a fire igniting within me. Our lips met softly at first, but as the kiss deepened, a rush of passion surged through both of us. In that instant, all my doubts and hesitations melted away. I lost myself in the sweetness of the kiss, the taste of wine mingling with the warmth of his body. Time ceased to exist as we explored this newfound connection, our hands finding each other with a hunger I hadn't expected. It felt forbidden yet liberating, the thrill of the unknown enticing me further into his embrace. He pulled away slightly, his eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice thick with desire. I nodded, feeling bold and alive. The playful side of me wanted to tease him, to draw out this delicious moment. "Maybe you should find out just how sure I am," I whispered, a smile dancing on my lips. Without another word, he closed the distance once more, capturing my lips in a passionate kiss that left me breathless. I wrapped my arms around his neck, feeling the strength in his shoulders as he pulled me closer. My heart raced as we stumbled back toward the couch, laughter mingling with desire. It was a moment of pure connection, the kind that felt like a dream. As we sank into the cushions, I could feel the thrill of the unexpected coursing through me. Our kisses grew more urgent, filled with the promise of what was to come. His hands roamed my back, exploring the curves of my body as I lost myself in the sensations. There was something exhilarating about being with someone so different from me, a man who had lived a full life, carrying stories etched into his skin. Suddenly I pulled back, looking into his eyes. "What are we doing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The reality of the situation hit me like a wave. I was about to cross a line I never thought I would. He smiled, brushing his fingers against my cheek. "We're living in the moment," he replied softly. His words sent a thrill through me, and I couldn't deny the excitement bubbling inside. The night felt alive with possibilities, and I was drawn to him like a moth to a flame. I leaned in again, surrendering to the chemistry that crackled between us, letting go of my inhibitions. As the night progressed, our laughter filled the apartment, mingling with the rhythmic patter of rain against the windows. We exchanged stories of our pasts, of loves lost and found, each tale adding depth to the growing connection between us. It was mesmerizing to listen to him speak, his deep, resonant voice making my heart flutter. Outside, the rain grew heavier, creating a snug atmosphere that perfectly framed our unfolding adventure. The warmth between us intensified, a spark igniting with every shared glance and word. He leaned in closer, his lips grazing my ear as he whispered tender words that sent shivers through me. I savoured the closeness, the thrill of having him near, his presence wrapping around me like a comforting embrace. As time passed, the outside world seemed to disappear, leaving just the two of us enveloped in our private world of longing. Each kiss grew more fervent, more urgent, as though we were trying to etch every sensation into memory. I could feel the magnetic pull of his body against mine, his movements confident and deliberate, making my pulse quicken. Eventually, our conversations slowed, the air thick with unspoken anticipation. I could sense the tension building, the weight of what was about to happen hanging in the balance. He paused, his eyes searching mine for any hint of hesitation. I felt the gravity of the moment, knowing everything depended on my next move. With a steady gaze, I took his hand and guided him down the hallway toward my bedroom. The door creaked softly as I pushed it open, revealing a room bathed in gentle light. I turned to gauge his reaction, and the look on his face sent a surge of excitement through me. He stepped inside, and I could see the desire in his eyes, a hunger that mirrored my own. The realization that we were about to cross a threshold sent a thrill of anticipation down my spine. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions swirling within me. As he moved closer, I could feel the heat radiating from him. Our lips met again, a fiery connection that left me breathless. The world outside ceased to exist as I lost myself in his embrace. Every kiss, every touch was electrifying, sparking a fire that spread through my entire being. We explored each other, each caress sending waves of pleasure coursing through us. The age difference between us seemed to vanish, leaving just the two of us, fully immersed in the moment. I revelled in the way he held me, the strength of his body contrasting with my softer form. It was a dance of intimacy, a bond that transcended everything else. As the night deepened, we gave in to our desires, losing ourselves in the sheer pleasure of the moment. It was an experience unlike any other, a whirlwind of passion that left me breathless. Every kiss, every touch felt like a celebration of the connection we had discovered. I could feel the walls I had built around my heart beginning to crumble. When the first light of dawn crept through the window, I found myself entwined in his arms, feeling a sense of contentment I hadn't expected. The bond we had formed felt genuine, a mix of passion and understanding that left me feeling truly alive. I had stepped into uncharted territory, and it was exhilarating. As the sun rose, casting a warm glow over the room, I knew this night would stay with me long after it ended. I had crossed a line I never thought I would, but in that moment it felt right. I smiled to myself, grateful for the unexpected turn my life had taken and eager for what the future might hold. In that surprising encounter, I had found not just a thrilling night, but a deeper connection that made me rethink everything I thought I knew about love and desire. As I lay there, feeling his heartbeat against mine, I realized that sometimes the most beautiful moments come from the surprises we never saw coming. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more exciting, suspenseful tales like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. There's so much more to come, and I promise you won't want to miss a single moment of it.